Humans just do it with money.
Like co-evolution or complex ecosystems?
Both,
Okay.
right? So the predator prey situation, we just use money and we use psychological control. So the thing that we were talking about before about force
Mhm.
is the people that create the force, they're the predator, right? And so they are the ones that they're the lion that eats the fast gazelle to promote, a particular type. So they're not actually trying. The only thing is with our complex ecosystem is they're not trying to create more of themselves. They're trying to create less of themselves. But there's it's still a predator prey dynamic.
You're saying that culture engenders capitalism in some strange way.
I suppose on at a high level, yes,
Mhm.
but it is more than capitalism. Like capitalism is too economic and financial to really be the meaning of what I'm saying, because that culture, it affects this, everybody, like the general public, on a psychological level.
Well, it does seem like we are suffering from this societal malaise. Like we've all kind of interacted with these ideas of how has culture become so deranged? And I know that you and I have talked about this for so long, maybe not using these pretty harsh words, but if we can be harsh and abrasive, first of all, do you agree that culture has become deranged? Maybe you have a different perspective, a warmer perspective on it. And then could you offer some like examples of how have we gone astray?
So, I can understand how you see deranged. And if you watch any television, it pretty much looks deranged. But I don't think that it is deranged. I think it's lacking. I think it's more that we're lacking quality and substance that creates that idea of derangement. Um, but it's also the old story of the crazy person doesn't actually realize they're crazy, and it's only if you ask yourself you're crazy that you're not. And so in that idea of derangement comes, or that idea of crazy comes where, like that where is where I would insert your idea of derangement, is that we have I eluded ourselves that we actually have lost any quality or substance, and we're chasing an ideal of something that was created by somebody else so that we're all more vapid and have less substance.
This ideal, who is it imposed by? Is this a kind of emergent thing? I think we'll get into emergence later in the down the line. Is this ideal the result of just decades of marketing and advertising?
I definitely think that that's a contributing factor, but I also think that as people, we need to take a little bit more responsibility for not the previous generations, but the ideas that we haven't explored. So, like there's a lot of, I'm very lucky I'm born in a generation where there was a lot of freedom and not a lot of oppression. And even still, there's existing oppression for particular minorities or particular types of groups of people. But pre, me being born, there is a lot of angst around particular roles, particular societal hierarchies, the way that certain people act, the way that certain people think, who they interact with, who they don't interact with. And so we've gone from a culture where we were told, or people were told, how to be, think, very totalitarian kind of ideas that everyone would fit into, and very limited ideas of what they would fit into. And then we started to get all this freedom, and we didn't replace the being told with exploration of what those values looked like for us. And so then the world got bigger and there was more opportunity to discover value, or more room for people to create ideas of what values and roles and things should look like. And so now we're all super confused about how we fit in to any of that space, and what is ours and what is adopted from our families, environments, experiences with other people.
So are we suffering from a quality or quantity problem of values? Because before there were these, very cemented frameworks. Now it's very fluid. I know that term has a lot of baggage, but let's just use it for now.
Mm-hmm.
Are there too many values, or maybe it's a problem of both? Like there are too many values and basically none of them lack like substance? How do you think about this one?
I think it's both, but I don't necessarily think that the quantity of values dilutes the quality of them. I think that it's the fact that we don't decide for ourselves what is ours. And so we don't actually have a value system as an individual. We have a value system as a collective or a group or a family, but we don't have a value system of our own. And so there's too many to choose from. We either just jump around between however many, like what group we're with today, this is our value system, or we don't have any values at all. We sort of talk highly of things or qualities or values, but we don't actually embody them or are them. And so they become, the fluidity is not the problem, it's the fact that the values are fluid and we don't understand how to transfer. And I think that's probably the biggest problem, is that transferring this value from this situation into the next situation. Like, how do I hold this value and still respect the context of the situation? And so because we can't situationally apply our values, it's just all too hard. And we think that each situation needs a different set of values.
That's a very abstract skill you just mentioned. And I think we should touch on that, the ability to look at a value, look at it without the situational context, and then apply that same value to another situation, another circumstance, while still retaining that value in all its quality. That does require a lot of critical thinking. And it doesn't seem like that critical thinking skill is that a lot of people have that, let's say it nicely. And so, how do you abstract a value? Maybe, is there like a tutorial? How did you learn to abstract a value? Was there just like this moment in your life where it clicked, or was this something that you had to continually work on?
I mean, you continually work on it, because as I discover, new things that are important to me, or how I want to interact with people, and how my environment changes, as I get older, or as I, advance in my career, the positions that I hold or the people that I'm speaking to change. And so I am forever learning how to adapt, not the value itself, but the way that I apply it in a situation. And I think, I find it sort of ironic when you said about like critical thinking. Not a lot of people have that skill. Like when I was younger, my parents said like common sense was buried in a cemetery, without a headstone. And so now, like the new gen version of that is, there's no critical thinking. And I think that the idea, like labeling, I don't disagree that critical thinking is an imperative quality that we should all learn to develop. But I think labeling it in that way makes it something that we don't have already. And we do actually have it. It's just that we're not exercising its ability. And we're not exercising its ability because it's not something over the generations that we have been taught, or that has been, um,
Upheld?
what should I say? Not necessarily upheld, but exemplified, right? So, for example, like my grandfather, if you take him out into the forest and left him there with an axe and said you're not coming for him for 2 weeks, there would be a small city built in the forest and he would have a home, right? Now, there's not a lot of people nowadays that could probably, or younger generations that could do that, just because they were never put in that situation to learn those skills. But so I would say that he has critical thinking when it comes situationally to that endeavor. But now in his, older life, where he won't be left in the bush or the forest, he doesn't have a huge amount of critical thinking skills, because it's not a matter of survival. His generation was brought up that critical thinking was about survival and being able to earn money to do anything, because, you didn't need a piece of paper to get a job back then. You showed up, and if they liked the look of you, you were hired. And so he has critical thinking skills, but he never used them for anything else other than survival. He doesn't use them in his daily life. He doesn't use them when he's, now speaking to women that sort of don't have the same kind of roles that they had as he was growing up. He doesn't use them, in a multicultural society all the time, because he was never it was never shown to him that that skill had other applications outside of building a hut in the forest.
Yeah, that's it's very interesting when you put it that way. And it does seem like Gen Z, or at least younger generations, maybe millennials in some way, if I can include you in this one. But it does seem like we are, again, to use the word fluid, we are more fluid in our ability to apply skills, to apply concepts, to apply frameworks that other generations struggled with. And I think this is like the unstoppable force meets the immovable object in society of Gen Z and the way their minds work. they can see so many different ways to apply certain schemas in technology and society, whereas old worldly generations, speaking broadly, they may struggle with that because they grew up in such a cemented world where things were just very, not cookie cutter, but very, very laid out, and it was just very traditional. There wasn't a lot of change in the world. Not that there is a lot of change now, but again, if we were to use this idea that tech is accelerationist, which I don't agree with, um, is
The
marketing
world is
social?
exactly the same as it always been.
Say again?
The world is exactly the same as it always been. Everybody's still wearing pants. Nobody's invented a new version of pants.
It, but it does feel like it has changed. I mean, from your perspective, has technology really changed us that much? Like, are we a different species? Have we become Homo techno, or are we just Homo sapiens plus this little asterisk of techno?
I would say that potentially Gen Z could be Homo techno. I wouldn't like to say that there's no possibility of that. I definitely don't believe generations pre sort of Gen Z era could really consider themselves Homo techno. But the thing is, do we want to be Homo techno? Like, we're human beings. Do we really want to become something that isn't human? And so, like, if we go back to the idea of has technology really progressed? Technology has progressed society. Technology has progressed the tools and resources that we use and have access to. Absolutely. Do I think that as a human species, as a human psyche, have we advanced or progressed? No, I actually think we've done the complete opposite.
Interesting.
And I
Uh,
think that something that we missed is that we didn't progress psychologically and we didn't evolve our psyches to meet those ever evolving disruptions in our outer or external society.
Say more about this because it does. I fundamentally agree with you. There was a philosopher on the Lex Fridman podcast. I'm forgetting his name, but he did say that, you know, we've had this exponential jump in human tech, but not this exponential jump in human wisdom. It actually might have been Daniel Schmachtenberger now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, you're saying that society or human wisdom may have regressed instead of just being static. So when
Mm-hmm.
you say regressed, what exactly do you mean? Can we define wisdom and then how is that regressed?
I mean, wisdom is such a broad idea, but wisdom is the ability to discern. So wisdom would probably, for me, align a little bit more with critical thinking. Like, how do I navigate this situation? How do I want to navigate it? How do I use past experience or transference to inform this situation without allowing it to determine the outcome, so that this is a new situation that I now navigate with more tools than I did in previous experiences. So wisdom, essentially narrowed at its core, is the ability to navigate in a way, in a desired way, for me.
Mhm.
Okay. And as far as regression is concerned, the reason I say that is we're less internally focused, more externally focused. So for me, that's a psychological regression. We don't know how to interact with each other anymore. We have no idea how to read cues. We don't understand. We have no sort of ability to empathize without uh, projecting. So what I mean by that is that I cannot listen to somebody else's story without and hear it for what their experience is. I'm already tracking through everything that I've experienced to make their experience the same as mine. It's something I used to do, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that it's a bonding, like it's used for a bonding mechanism. And so society, and it's still in my generation, we started to become rapid bonding. Like, we started to need to rapidly bond, right? And so that for us is a way to rapidly bond. Like, we make the situations the same, so we're not different, so we're identical, and it's easier to assimilate. And we do that more and more, and it doesn't matter how abstract the concept is, we still rapidly bond on something that's not even similar. There is a healthy way to bond on differences, absolutely, but we're not doing that. We're bonding on how we can make those differences the same without acknowledging that they're really differences. And so now we're just bonding on sort of bizarre concepts that don't sort of matter to either person, but it's just a reason to bond. So we have no way to navigate each other. as human beings. And we use, like if we look at the increase in pornography and the increase in use of social media, we're actually more comfortable interacting either through or with technology than we are with each other.
When you say we, are you talking about humans generally, or are we kind of using Gen Z as this framework?
I'm humans generally, absolutely.
So you think human civilization, again, in general, has started using technology, specifically digital technology. I don't want to talk about rocks or arrows, but digital technology, basically probably from 2008 onwards, digital devices, you know, internet connected devices, etc. We're starting to use these technologies as portals, not into a better world, but into the world.
Interconnecting with one another. Yes, I definitely think that there are a certain age. There's sort of a certain age limit. There's a lot of people that exist in the world that sort of don't know or use or interact with technology, and so they sort of were not exposed to that. There's still a lot of those people alive today that didn't have a smartphone and still probably don't have a smartphone. But majority of sort of the professional or working career, and I will say that like probably even some of that older generation, like the lower end of that older generation, are still trapped in that cycle and don't have the skills to know what's actually happening to them. My uncle, he's 60 and he gets stuck in reels on Instagram. He's
Mm.
like, he watches more reels on Instagram than I watch on Instagram because he just gets sort of sucked into that idea. And granted, he doesn't use that to interact with other people, but it still shows how far technology has reached even generations that are not familiar with it or grew up with
Yeah, but you're also a bad example to use when comparing to the average person because you're, no, I mean it as a compliment because your relationship with technology is very healthy and in the same breath, I will say very strange. Um,
it.
how did you even come to have a healthy relationship with technology? And I'll set it up. I mean, you have social media apps on your smartphone, on your digital device. And one of our previous conversations off the air, I was saying, oh, that's very strange or something. That's very silly because I personally don't have any apps on my phone because I find them too addicting. And you're saying, well, no, because I have a healthy relationship with these apps on my phone because I'm able to control my behavior while interacting with them. I'm able to use them for, minutes rather than hours and turn them off and learn how these things are addicting. So when did you learn how these apps are changing your behavior, prompting you to pick them up and interact with them on a daily, if not hourly basis? And then how did you also find that sweet spot of, okay, I'm not going to use them to the extreme. I'm also not going to not use them. Here is this happy middle.
So first I want to touch on the idea of like I'm able to control my behavior. I don't need to control my behavior because my behavior doesn't incline to overuse those apps. Now, that's not saying that I don't have or have the potential to have an addictive behavior. I used to smoke, I used to vape, things like that. So I have the potentiality to have an addictive behavior. And coming off, like quitting smoking, I believe that's controlling your behavior. I don't have the same relationship with social media as I did with quitting smoking. I think there's a couple of factors to that. The first is I was really, really lucky that I was old enough that at some point social media was just everybody posting what they were eating for dinner. And so that, like, there was a phase where, everybody would just post food. And so that, to me, that is not interesting. So that was kind of helpful. And also pre that, if I actually go back through my Facebook feed right to the very start, we were still like there was no messenger back then, right? So we were still using like the feed to talk to each other. Like there was no actual pictures of anything. It was actually just conversation. It's just another way to text each other where everybody could see.
I'm sorry, how old are you? Oh my God, I don't even remember that feature. Oh no.
It was the only picture. That was all it was. If
Wow.
you could like say if you could do like a little emoji thing, that was huge.
Facebook before direct messages. This is
Yes.
unheard of. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, you learn
Yes.
something new every day,
So
truly.
and so I'm very lucky that probably I wasn't thrown into social media in the in the state that it exists now, this over encompassing, all faceted entity that has a life of its own, really. But at the same time, I've also, sort of evolved into a world that has had that exposure, and my business exists. My early business existed in that space too. The thing with social media for me is that I just don't simply understand the need for everybody to know my every thought, right? And so my thoughts are important to me, and sometimes they're half baked and sometimes they're fully baked, but I don't have to have the need to sort of project that every day. So I don't actually want to hear all the noise in everybody else's brain either, because I have a lot in my own. So social media for me does actually just feel like a whole lot of noise that I don't have capacity for. So if I'm going to use social media, it's for an intention. But that's the same with everything. Like, I won't watch television unless I have an intention. I won't read a book unless I have an intention. I won't walk down the street unless I have an intention. So social media just naturally doesn't feel intentional for me. It just feels like a lot of noise that I have to filter through.
So where lots of people use social media or turn to the television or turn to cigarettes as a passive activity, not necessarily for cigarettes in the context of you, but you use these
But it is.
things potentially as an active thing. Like, you're very focused. You understand exactly what you're doing. You're not just sitting there doom scrolling. You are
Oh,
there.
never.
You're completing a task. You're watching the television, SpongeBob for 3 minutes, and then you turn it off.
Yeah, I just want to giggle. Yeah.
You you did touch on
SpongeBob is
this.
the worst example. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I mean, I had to bring you back to like Gen Z after Facebook with no direct messages. That was I honestly I didn't even know that was
Yeah,
possible.
I'm really old. I just look really good for my age.
There was this thing that you touched on, which was social media is this like all-encompassing thing. Um, what is this all-encompassing thing? I just let's lay out exactly what this landscape, this monster of social media is, because I feel like a lot of people interact with Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, Facebook to some degree, LinkedIn to some degree, YouTube, Disney Plus, Netflix. Not that these latter two streaming services are social medias, but they operate in the same way of hacking your psychosocial behavior. So what is social media from your perspective? How has it metamorphized into something that is totally and utterly against human health in a very literal way? Start
I think
wherever is comfortable.
sorry, yes, I'm just gonna, because that is not an easy question to answer, and I would need a really big wall to scope out all the ways that it's insidiously affected. Because the other thing with social media is that it is not actually only affecting you when you're looking at it. It's affecting the way that you process the world when you put it, even when you put it down, right? And so it's not only become like an alternative reality, it's also become a filter or a lens of the way that we look at general reality, like the actual reality. And it sort of reminds me, I don't know whether you're familiar with like Dali, the artist, but some of his Salvador Dali had a really weird way of um, interpreting the world. I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't know a ton about him as a person. He was dead long before I was born, but he, to me, it looks like that's how he saw the world. When he opened his eyes, that's how he processed what existed. And so I feel like social media would look much like how people look at their own everyday reality is filtered sort of like Salvador Dali, is all of those, instead of pictures or icons, it's, like somebody's Facebook page or somebody's Instagram last picture. So it really does distort your experience of other people, which is probably why we've regressed interacting with each other. But it also distorts your self concept and your ability to perceive what you're interacting with. So, but the idea of how it's created, it's how it's been created into this alternative reality probably stems from things, well, not even things like smoking, but like alcoholism and smoking and things like that, we use those things as human beings to avoid feelings. There's a in Ariana Huffington's book, there was a quote. She had a conversation with somebody, and the woman was like, "It's not about the drugs; it's about the drugs, how the drugs mask the thing that I don't want to deal with." I'm terrible. I'm butchering that quote because I'm not really good at like high level remembering things, but that was the gist of the conversation. She was trying to come off or give up doing drugs, and it wasn't the drugs, it was the things that she had to deal with once she came off the drugs that she was avoiding, and she was using the so I think that social media, the reality that social media has created, is just a whole other world to capitalize on that very fact. The things that we want to avoid are so easily lost in a void of noise. And so that is how it's perpetuated or self-perpetuated to the state that it exists, and the addictive, the level of addiction that it's created with people.
It seems like social media is just this like ability. It's not just this ability to procrastinate, this thing that you can procrastinate with. It's so much more. If I may play devil's advocate, social media is one of the reasons why you and I got connected. It's one of the reasons why I'm working at the startup I'm working at now. There are a lot of benefits. People are making mega careers out of social media, Instagram influencing, TikTok influencing. So we can't, on the surface, say that it's just this entirely negative thing. It serves no purpose. But on the flip side, I know you want to jump in, but on the
No, I
flip
don't want to
side,
jump in. I'm interested in the thought level.
it just seems like in every single way, like there was this Homer Simpson little clip of like alcohol, the solution to and cause of all the world's problems. And it seems like social media has now occupied that same thing. Like again, for some reason, and I know we'll get into transference theory, but in the 20th century, it was cigarettes, and nobody knew how bad cigarettes were until the science came out. Now everybody doesn't like cigarettes anymore. It's starting to happen with alcohol. Like Chris Williamson starts this low to no movement. Huberman puts this 90-minute segment out on alcohol. And even Huberman said, I got so many messages or people were telling me that watching the podcast was an excuse for them to quit. So people needed this kind of like external push to quit consuming something that they had a funny feeling was bad for them. Is social media occupying the same domain of, yeah, maybe there are one or two things that it's good for, but it's a real net negative, and the science is going to come out in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we're going to say, why on earth did we let our children sign up for Facebook when they were 6, to start using TikTok when they were 5, to have Instagram accounts all the way up until they were 18?
So I find it interesting that you use the cigarette example, because that generation of cigarettes that you're talking about, where they became, or they were known to be unsafe, and they became unsafe before that, is that there's a whole generation, well, there's not even just a whole generation, there's generations before that that smoked tobacco that didn't have health concerns attached to them, because smoking tobacco in its rawest sense is actually not bad for you. Smoking tobacco with rat poison and broken glass and nicotine and all the things that companies added to tobacco to make them cheap, consumable, and addictive is what made smoking a cause for health concerns. So it's the progressive consumerism that and behaviorism that's added to something over time that then makes it unhealthy. Like even radium is the same. Like Marie Curie discovered radium, and it was like the cure all for everything immediately. You couldn't, she had people lined up down streets to come in to be treated for all kinds of things. It cured everything, but it hadn't existed long enough for people to realize that it would actually kill you. And so everybody that had lined up to be treated by it and was taking any tablets and drinking it and all kinds of stuff, they all died rapidly after a certain period of time, because there is no idea of the long-term effects of using something like that in your system. And that's actually an opposite analogy, because now that we have technology, we've been able to harness the elements and compositions of that element to make them, semi-healthy to use in certain instances, particularly with treatments of cancers. But again, we all rush out and do something because somebody said, with no idea that long term that has any effect on us. And it's because we blindly do the thing, right? It's not because the thing is bad for us or it's unhealthy or it's addictive. It's because we blindly do the thing instead of asking ourselves the relationship we want to have with it. So yes, the idea of cigarettes, if you smoked one cigarette a week for the whole life, you would never have a health concern, not that came from cigarettes, right? But it's the fact that if you're a cigarette smoker, you smoke anywhere between 8 and 25 cigarettes a day
Mm.
because you have a passive relationship with the cigarettes. You don't actually have an active relationship with them. And so anything, it comes down to the relationship we have with it. The same as alcohol. Like everybody's coming out to say, well, the new cool thing is that alcohol isn't cool, right? But if you have a healthy relationship with alcohol, it doesn't impede or have any effect on your life outside of the time that you're interacting with alcohol. It's the same as pornography. It's the same as people. It's the same as exercise, everything in moderation, including moderation, right? And that's all about the relationship that you have with anything. And social media is exactly the same. It's no longer, once it stops being a tool and it becomes a need, you have a passive relationship with its existence.
It's far too much, I'll speak as a true Gen Z, but it's far too much work to constantly think about the relationship I have to everything all the time when all of these things are forcibly built to addict me. Like the Snickers bar, the flaming hot Cheetos, which I had a bag a couple days
I mean,
ago.
they're poisonous. Have you read
So
No.
good. They're poisonous, but they're good.
Yeah,
Oh
no, they're
man.
poisonous, everybody. I do not eat those.
Oh my God. It's bad. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm just saying it's delicious. Not sponsored by Cheetos, by the way. I don't want the sponsor, by the way. Just throwing that out there. Um, but it's like it's too much work. I mean, social media, alcohol, cigarettes, digital pornography, streaming services, even YouTube. It's like I have to think about my relationship with all of these things, and then you tack on, things around society, consumerism, always wanting new stuff, skincare, always wanting to look better, the spa, clothing, jewelry, you know, all of these things. It's like, I don't have that much time in the day to critically think about, oh, okay, am I buying too many clothes, for instance, It's like, how can I even think about one relationship when I'm bombarded by all of these hyper stimuli that also drag my attention away from myself, away from the internal to focus on the external? It's like it's a non-starter. I mean, you at least had again an interaction with a world that was not predicated on hyper-stimulated digital technology, right? Consumerism still existed, but not in this direct hourly way. Like you had advertisements in newspapers, for example, that you had to clip out and take to the store. But now I'm
Okay, I'm
getting,
not that old.
I'm just saying, you know, I don't know what it was like in the 1800s, but but
There
like,
were no coupons.
okay, sorry, just Gen Z talking. But now I'm getting literally notified by Etsy or by Netflix or by any of these applications telling me, no, 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 like click on me, use me, spend money here, use this coupon, Uber Eats. Every time I order an Uber, it's like, don't cook, use Uber Eats. And I'm like, are you joking? You're telling people this? If you don't have even a modicum of willpower, you will fall for that every single time. So then, Jamie, how do we get people out of that? How do we teach them about the matrix that they are in, that they are being affected by, without being condescending, without being, oh, you're just dumb and controlled. We have to be, kind and hold their hand. But it's like, how do you tell people that all of these things, all of these facets of society are not necessarily built to keep them healthy, happy, and wealthy?
I mean, the fact that they're not happy, healthy, and wealthy is obviously an example of that. It's proof that that exists, right? I
Right.
mean, like if you think about, like, I mean, everyone will complain about where all the money lies, but They're not willing to actually look at like what they're participating in to keep themselves on the bottom end of that scale of where all the money sits, right? And I'm also not going off condoning that, everybody should now become, Epstein and make their money in corrupt and horrendous ways, right? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that if you don't want to be those three things, then you have to look at your own life. And so it isn't about, yes, social media is hyper stimulating. And, now I don't know who taught companies that people, I mean, I actually even got a text message from my chiropractor to remind me that I hadn't made an appointment. I called them and I was like, if you send me another reminder text message, I will never turn up to your shop ever again.
Whoa.
Because
Say more
that
about
it
that.
is, it's just so unnecessary, right? Like you bombarding me with I have to buy from you makes me want to buy from you less,
Hmm.
right? So I'm
Interesting.
not sure who taught companies, and I'm sure that at some point it had an application, but I'm not really sure who taught companies that that was the best way to go about getting business. Because for as many people that are not like me, there's plenty of people that are still like me, right? And so the other thing that I don't understand is I also now we're in a world where we're so technologically advanced that I don't even have to opt in for that stuff. And there is no option to opt out. I mean, you can just send me text messages however you see fit. Like, no, I have a boundary, a huge boundary. Do not bombard me with marketing. I don't want to hear it. And so my way of saying no is that I won't do business with you anymore. So the fact that, yes, I'm sorry, I digress. I got distracted. But Gen Z are trying to fight social media. What they're not, instead of working out all the relationships that they have with everything, it's not about understanding the relationships you have with everything. It comes closer to home. It's more internalized than that. If you understand more basic needs, you don't need to understand your relationship with everything else because you enact. So we go back to the idea of values. If you have a set of values that you function by every day, then you don't have to decide your relationship with anything unless it's something new, right? Or unless you want to change your mind, right? But you interact with things the way that you interact and understand with yourself. That's just how you interact in the world. So the idea of like your relationship with cigarettes, right? If I want to be healthy, if a high value of mine is wanting to be healthy, then I'm not going to have a relationship with cigarettes. I'm not going to smoke, right? And if I do smoke, I'm going to smoke so that it doesn't affect my health. So I'm going to have one cigarette a month, or, I social smoke only when I meet this one friend in Italy for 3 days of the year. Like you can have a relationship with cigarettes like that if you want that kind of relationship with cigarettes. And so we're missing, like, back to hyperstimulation, is that people are not dumb and controlled. They're conditioned, right? And Gen Z have this uh, kind of this hyperstimulated condition or hyperstimulus condition that they've gone through. But everybody has gone through that, right? We are conditioned by the way our parents see the world. We're conditioned by the school that we go to. We're conditioned by the religion that we grow up in. We're conditioned by, what kind of food we have available to eat, what country we live in, how old we are, what generation we're in. Like all of those things create us. They create components of who we are. And so instead of having a relationship with everything else, it's understanding how those things built who you are.
It's still for me. I mean, not dumb and controlled, but they're conditioned. To me, it's the same thing.
Well,
Conditioned
I
to
mean,
be
you can
dumb and
be
controlled.
conditioned to be dumb and controlled, yeah, but that doesn't, and see, that's again, like that's a label, right? If you believe you're dumb and controlled, you will be dumb and controlled, right? If that's a belief that you have. But if you don't want to have a relationship with being dumb and controlled, you don't want to be dumb and controlled. You don't have to know how to be smart. You just have to know you don't want to be dumb and controlled.
But how do you even get that awareness, that realization? It doesn't just magically happen. That's what I'm saying. If you never listen to these kinds of talks, not to bestow arrogance on this, but if you don't listen to things that make you aware of your predicament, you will never be aware of your predicament. And that's what I mean is how do you scale this up to get the average person to really think about their relationships, all of these things, even one at a time? But maybe let's take a step back, not think about all of the relationships. Let's look at the internal because that's something that you focus on, which is if you focus on the internal, you hold health to a high priority in your life, then you start looking at everything of how is this relating to my health. So you look at the cigarettes, it's like, you know what? I'm not going to smoke a pack a day because that's not good for me. But maybe I can have a relationship with cigarettes or alcohol or insert whatever vice that you want, where, when I'm in Italy or when I'm in this certain place with these certain people or insert whatever circumstance, I can have a relationship. I can enjoy it. I don't have to worry about it. It's not affecting me as much. Um, but I still hold health to the highest priority. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but how do you, first of all, get to a place where you understand what your values are? How did you do that for you? And then we can go from there.
Ironically enough, it wasn't until I was 27 that I didn't realize I had any of my own. And so what I did was I Googled what a value was, right? I looked it up in the dictionary and I Googled what a value is. And then I Googled all the things that could be considered a value. And I wrote them on 10 pieces of paper. And then I highlighted what I either wanted, had, or wasn't sure about. And the things that I didn't understand, I Googled. And then I decided if they were important to me or not. And then I wrote all the ones that I wanted on a tree.
Okay, we're going to come back to the tree. But you didn't answer the question, which was how did you realize this? You talked about everything afterwards, which is when after the realization, these are the steps you took, which are very important. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is the most important, like this is the point of the internet, a point of technology, which is to augment you. You didn't have to go to like the encyclopedia. You could have spent like a couple hours researching it. And then we'll come back to the tree again. But how did you even come to this realization? First of all, you said not your own values. So you were working with things that were given to you, or you were maybe conditioned to have.
I like the word given because, the people that came before me, they were given them. And so they only know how to give what they have been given. Everybody just passes it on. It just compounds and compacts.
Yeah, but if we go down that line, we can digress. But if we go down that line, then you have to go to an inevitable bookend, which is who was the first person that gave these things.
I mean, that's not an I mean, how many people in your genealogical tree? Like, if you're going to go all the way back to like however humans, like that's the compounding situation that you're in, though, right? Like, for as long as your genetics has existed, what is in your understanding has been compacted and compounded by each and every person that's in that line of thinking.
Have we forgotten this?
Not necessarily sure whether we have truly forgotten it, whether we acknowledge it or not. And the thing is, our culture um, does not sort of allow for any room. Like, for example, like our parents interact with us the way that they want to be interacted with. So we inform the world based on that relationship. Like I always think about the idea of trust. Like my parents used to let me go out when I was a teenager and be like, okay, we trust you, right? But what they're really saying to me is they trust that I act as they expect, right? They don't actually trust me. They trust me to act as they expect. They have made a clear set of expectations and they trust that I will follow and not deviate from those expectations. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There were 10 or so occasions where I deviated from that. And I didn't deviate it because it was something I wanted to do or I felt I knew myself better than their set of expectations. I just deviated from it because, somebody else was, or I got invited to do something and I wanted to. I was a teenager exploring, right? But you grow up with the idea of like trust means that I must meet a level of expectations, right? If I'm going to give you trust, these are the parameters for the trust that I give you. And so the everything that our parents do, everything that anybody in our lives does is from their perspective, right? And we adopt it in the perspective that they give it to us in, same as ideas and concepts around love, religion, uh, environment, and all of those things are all created in our, individual ecosystem. And so unless the key is that we're not taught that we actually get to choose that they are for us or they're not, right? Because our parents need to bring us up in a relation in a situation. Like my parents had 4 kids. Could you imagine like 4 completely different people between the ages of 3 and 8 running around a house doing whatever they wanted? Like, I mean, I'm sure that some parents have done it, but it wasn't their style of parenting, right? And so when I become 18 and I can go outside of that, I don't think to myself, okay, now I get to decide who I'm going to be. I'm already you know, prepared to be whoever I was within this space. And so it's a matter of like saying to ourselves, even if our parents have to put us in that situation or that's how they create a household, the key is understanding that that is not the entire world and it is not how the entire world works. And we actually acknowledge it for their experience of the world and get to decide what ours looks like. But then you get into the convoluted idea of like how that then that becomes hyperstimulus because there's so many other ways that your life could look. How do you navigate that then?
So how do you? Well, did you suffer? Did you have to suffer through that hyperstimulus, or were you old enough to realize it before?
I mean, I don't think that I like the idea of suffer through something. Like, you definitely have to go through a period where you decide what is important to you, what your values are, what you like and what you don't like about what you experienced in your life, and what that means for you, like how congruent it was, how incongruent it was, like, and then how you act in relation to what you were taught that you don't like, right? Because, like, once you realize that you're taught to be a certain way, and you act like that all the time, and then you realize that you don't necessarily want to be like that, there's a lot of behavior in yourself that you're like, I probably don't want to respond in that situation like that anymore. And so it's, like, it's not hard work, but it's work. You have to, but I suppose, again, I had to uncondition, like, I mean, I'm taught to be that this is, the parameters of everything, not that these are some of the parameters for these people around me and that there are others. I have to, like, come to the realization that they're not the only parameters that exist. And the thing about, like, going back to using social media in a positive way is social media or tech is a way to be more high levelly exposed to more things if you were looking to understand different aspects. Like, if you want to, understand what Italy's like, I mean, now you can get on YouTube and Google like 50,000 different types of people that have been to Italy this week that have all put it online. When I grew up, you couldn't do that. Like, Italy was the description of what somebody gave you in words.
Which to me is more romantic. I mean, I disagree with you on this front of tech being a positive because it gives you more exposure to things. Maybe just in the context that you gave, but that dilutes it for me. I don't know. Maybe it's just being a Gen Z or growing up in that, where if I wanted to see what Spain was like or Italy was like, I could just like look at it, and that awe, that wonder was kind of diluted. It was taken away. Whereas before, you read about Italy, you read about the magnificent architecture, and you actually go and you experience it. You just saw pictures. You didn't have these influencers with these very high definition cameras going around and looking at everything, or these walking tours where it's kind of like you're there. You had to force yourself to be there. But now it's like I can go anywhere in the world without going anywhere in the world.
And that is the thing that you've implied with what I said. I didn't say that that was your experience of the thing, right?
Mm.
But if you wanted to expose yourself to something else, you can. But it being exposed to something and experiencing it are two very different things. So I am not saying that you YouTube, the 50,000 people that have been to Italy this week and go, okay, well, now I've seen Italy. I'm just saying, if you want to understand the culture difference between where you're sitting in Australia and Italy, you can expose yourself to the fact that there is a very different culture on the other side of the world. And without, so the one thing about, reading, like you imply, is that whenever you read, you still read from your perspective, right? You still read from, so your imagination can only go as far as your imagination is willing to go. And so your exposure is still very limited to your previous experience. Right. And so when you read about Italy and you read how romantic it is and all that kind of stuff, if you have been exposed to things that create those feelings, your imagination can go there. But there's a lot of people that would read that same description as you and not be taken in their imagination to this very romantic and cultural place. It would just be words on a page. Right. And so, yes, if you're a reader and you have a great imagination, you could potentially do what you've done. But either way, whichever way you expose yourself to something, it's still not the experience of it. You still have to go to Italy to completely understand. And even in going to Italy, you know, like you have to be there willing to understand the culture and the people, and not just be there to observe, because observing is different than experiencing. So you we've got way off track.
At
Yeah.
27, we
Hmm.
realized you realized that all these values that you had were not your own. You were
Hmm.
given them by whoever,
Yes. Hmm.
parents, environment, circumstance.
Yes.
So again, how did you realize that? Like, where did that enlightenment come from?
So I probably, well, again, like we talk about being poor and dumb and controlled, uh, I was in a string of really terrible relationships. And I did not, and when I say a string, it was two consecutively, but they were just lasted for a really long time. But it was not the kind of environment that I wanted to keep being in. I've got to be very careful here, because I've experienced it and come out the other side, but there's plenty of people that are in the middle of it, and it's not a very nice
Sure.
thing to be in the middle of. And it's very hard to actually realize that there is more than that.
Mhm.
But part of realizing that there is more than anything is choosing that there has to be, right? That's, you know, a huge concept. And so I didn't necessarily come out of anything. I was in a place that I didn't like, and decided that there absolutely had to be more than this, or different than this.
How did you have the strength to actually enact that?
Honestly, that question I cannot answer. And if I asked myself that question then, I wouldn't have even called it strength. I would have called it clawing and screaming and, you know, crawling over some kind of line with absolutely nothing left. That's what it felt like.
And this brought you to be, I use enlightened loosely. I want to keep respect for that, but
Yeah,
it does seem
very
like,
loose. Yeah.
yeah, it does seem like you were enlightened in a sense, or made aware is probably a better word for it.
Mm-hmm.
And you started looking at values. You wrote down all of your values, all the values that you thought of on sheets of paper, 10 sheets of paper. You looked at the ones that you wanted, maybe ones that you didn't want, and then you went to a tree, the tree of enlightenment.
Well, I didn't think about it like that. I was just drawing. I was trying to work out like how I visualized this for myself. And one of the things, again, going like now in hindsight, I understand why I went to the tree, but the tree was obviously symbolic of like what I had grown through and with that I no longer wanted, right? And what I actually wanted my tree to look like. The ironic thing about my values on that tree is that everything that I had put on there, in some way, shape, or form, I had interacted with it in my life, or played with it, toyed with it. You know, like in some instances, I tried to exercise it. In other instances, I was really good at exercising it, but I couldn't use it in my life every day in all situations. And so I think like that probably becomes the starting point of just observing myself and how I am in any situation. And that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. You know, like I was an instance yesterday, I'm 35 years old, that somebody, you know, interacted with me in a way that I has not been exposed to before. I tried my best to navigate it, but upon reflection, I probably would have liked to do better, right? And so next time I'm in similar situation, I will have the tools and the understanding of how I want to act in that situation, and so I will utilize them. But the values, creating like the tree, made me actually look at what I was using and what I wasn't using, and how I knew how to use it, and how I like where I didn't know. And so it sort of became like an exercise. Or, I mean, I like to dare myself to do things. So, you know, like if I want to have more grace and I know that I can do that in this situation, I can dare myself to do it in another situation. And you just build on things. Like you don't, and again, I don't like the word enlightened, you don't become aware and then just like everything in the world is now a completely different color. It doesn't go from black and white to technicolor. You know, like you just build it's one thing at a time.
Yeah, you are the most emotionally intelligent person I've ever met. And every single time I've talked with you, obviously we've talked much more off the air, but I've come up with so many tools and skills to tackle life. So there is just like this well of knowledge that you have um, in emotional intelligence, and other things. That is a very just curious and fascinating thing. So I want to commend you for that. You said something last time we talked, every action informs the future. And that is something where I have taken that to heart, where I've realized that, again, looking at my behavior, the things that I do on a daily basis will inform the future, the person I am in the future. How can we help Gen Z? Let me take a step back. How can we help people make better actions now to help us build a better future collectively?
I think a really important thing, and I've actually, it's funny you came back to this because I've thought of it twice since we've been talking. I think the first really important thing of a good future is recognizing that there are some people that are really, really happy with the way the world is, right? They're completely content. Like we're talking about it like some of those things are, sort of deranged or uncomfortable or not enough, but there are a portion of the world that will be very, very comfortable with how their life is and how they interact with social media and how the world is progressing. And I think it's really important, instead of saying, well, those people need to change, it's really important to say that they're entitled to feel like that. They're complete, just as I'm entitled to feel like it's not enough or we could do better, those people are entitled to believe that that's the best possible reality for them. And so the other thing is that there are people that, that are in that position of thinking that this is all, wishing that there was more, but believing that that is all that it is. Those people, you can't rip them out of those situations. You can't force them to see different. Again, like me, you have to pick the values and then build on each thing as you go. They what they need is they need the right thing at the right time, the way that they want to hear it, to be able to become aware that something is not all right. Like if I go back as a reference to, the not so great relationships that I was in, I legitimately thought that that was normal. And I legitimately thought that majority of people would experience relationships the way that I was experiencing them. Right. And when you speak to people, like I'm not the kind of person that puts all of my dirty laundry out, but there's a lot of things that you just leave out because you just assume that other people are experiencing them. It was only when I moved and made a new set of friends that I realized how different their experiences of relationships were to mine. And that's not even in, like having them spill their guts. That was just literally in the way that things interacted in their household. And so that becomes the thread of awareness that starts the questioning. And then that's the doorway, right? Everybody's doorway is different, whether it's the fact that they're poor, whether it's the fact that they're controlled or conditioned, or, in a bad relationships, or um, stuck in a loop on, you know, having plastic surgery to fix their face to look like their Snapchat filter, like whatever their thing is, somewhere, if they think somewhere that there is something better, then that's the doorway to start to pull the thread of everything else. But you cannot make them, you can't pick them up out of that situation, put them in a different situation, because they'll fight you tooth and nail every way, every step of the way.
Last two questions. What is your mission? Like, what are you doing in life? And what do you want to do in life? Like, it,
Everything.
well, that's what I mean is that, like, for you, you're so multifaceted, um, and you've been a major help to me in so many ways. But like, you have a company, 9 Carat, you also have Jemmy Meyer Enterprises. Like, but what are your big goals? How do you want to see the world changed? If you can't talk about that, I know there are a bunch of forces that want to see the world stay the same.
We don't get cut out. So I am so pro human, right? There are a lot of people that I speak to that are like, oh my God, who would want to live? Like, I'm so glad I'm, Christian or whatever. Like, I don't believe in reincarnation, because who would want to come back and do this again? Me, I'm like, give me all the things. Like, I want to roll around in the dirt. I want to be as human as possible. I want to make mistakes. I want to live my life to the fullest. and I want, like, it's such a glorious thing, right? And so I don't believe that that is specific to me as a human being. I believe that we all have the capacity to be that human and want to be that human. So I am just, everything that I do is pro people, pro humanity. And I would like to see us under, fully understand the complexity that we have to bring rather than be the same.
Who are you when the camera is off? Are you always
This,
this like
I am this.
is this the
Yeah, there
person?
is no, mhm. Yeah, there is, I am this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, do not run into me in the street, like, and not know me and be like, hello, how's your day? I'd be like, blah, 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 blah.
Well, it's
There
gonna
will
be good
be,
because
there's no,
when you do start the cult, it's gonna be very beneficial. Jamie,
oh,
this was such a good episode. Really happy to have you in my life and really happy to have you back on the podcast. It's definitely not gonna be the last time we talk, but where can we find you? And where can we find the other thing, the cult?
the cold. There is no cold. I'm
Not
gonna be
yet.
like Forrest Gump running down the street with all these people
Not yet. The
following me
t-shirts are
because
being
of
made.
you. It's going to be your fault.
Where can we find you
you
online?
cannot you cannot find me in a church or in a cult. So you can find me online at jamiemyenterprises.com. And just for the record, I am equally as lucky to have had you in my life. So thank you very much for having me and always including me on all your crazy, deranged and
I have to say I have been emailing you so much and it's like I feel bad sometimes with the amount that I
you don't need to
spam
feel
you.
bad.
I feel
You don't.
so
You know, it's
bad.
not spam. Spam is advertising. All the advertising, got all my, like, I always love email marketing. I mean, I don't love it, but I always, everyone that sends me email marketing, I'm like, really? I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, eventually somebody's going to be too lazy to Google where I can find the best marketing agency. So if you just send this email out, somebody will need one eventually. But that's spam. Please, if anybody's watching this and you're an email marketer, please remove me from all of your lists. You only get deleted. I do not read it.
I got an email earlier today and it was like, I miss you. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's not happening now. And it's just like random people reaching out to me. Like obviously fake people trying to get me to click, but it's like, can't you craft the message in a better way? It's like, I think we both like love and I want to explore love with you. So click on this link and let's start talking. And I'm like, even if I was like really dumb, I wouldn't click on that link. Like, can't you make it better? Like, why don't you get better at trying to scam me? You know what I
Well,
mean?
for one, there's a lot like those. Some people still click on that, so they don't need to be better at that. They're
They
speaking to a particular type of person.
they
The stuff
deserve
that
to be
I
scammed.
receive,
They
they
deserve
do
it.
not deserve to
They
be
deserve
scammed.
it.
They do not deserve to be scammed. No. But
Oh
you know
my
how interesting it
goodness.
is having a male name and being on like people's lists? Like I get all kinds of stuff that should absolutely go to men. All kinds of stuff.
Jamie is unisex.
No, not in, I mean, might be in like younger generations, but the way I spell it, I mean, I was Mr. or Master my whole school life. Like if the, showed up to school every day as a female, but if you looked at the school roll, I was Master Jamie Meyer. I'm still, the Australian government still has me down as Mr. Jamie Meyer, even though I literally went into their office with my passport as a female.
I
My
love
birth
how
certificate does say female.
we weren't supposed to touch identity politics, and now in the last
Sorry.
throws, we've
I'm
touched it.
sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.